3 weeks ago, my phone buzzed with a text from my stepmom demanding that I clean our family's ranch in Boise for their upcoming weekend getaway. I'm Robin Harris, 28, a marketing professional and apparently also the family's unpaid maid. The device vibrated against the mahogany surface of my desk, a jarring, mechanical intrusion into the quiet hum of my office. It wasn't just a notification, it was a summons. The screen lit up, casting a cold, artificial glow across my paperwork, displaying the name Wendy alongside a message that seemed to drip with venom even in plain text. "Don't be late, you lazy bum." The cursor blinked, indifferent to the insult, as if I had nothing better to do than scrub floors for their little vacation crew, as if my career, my life, and my dignity were merely placeholders until they required my servitude. I laughed, but it wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a short, bitter sound, like dry leaves crunching underfoot, a noise that scraped against the back of my throat. I didn't bother replying immediately. My fingers hovered over the glass screen, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a sudden volcanic surge of exhaustion. For years, they'd treated me like a servant, a fixture in the background of their lives, expecting me to drop everything to make their existence smoother, softer, easier. They viewed me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a utility, something to be used until it broke. But not this time. The narrative was about to fracture. As the texts kept coming, a cascade of digital demands, more orders, more insults, disguised as family banter, I scrolled through them without a second thought. "Pick up the groceries," one read. "Make sure the sheets are Egyptian cotton, Joshua has sensitive skin," another commanded. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the ghost of a habit urging me to type "okay" or "on it," but the words felt useless, ash in my mouth. Instead, a different impulse took hold, a wild, terrifying, and exhilarating thought that bloomed in my chest like a dark flower. I closed the messaging app. I opened a travel website. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, as I booked a flight, not to Boise, not to the dust and the grime and the ungrateful silence of the ranch. I packed a bag, throwing in bikinis instead of rubber gloves, sunscreen instead of bleach. I headed straight to the airport, the taxi ride passing in a blur of neon lights and adrenaline. An hour after their latest message, a particularly nasty one, asking if I was too incompetent to reply. I was already past security, watching the world shrink below me as the plane ascended into the clouds. By the time they were likely packing their cars, expecting a spotless house, I was sipping a drink at a luxury resort in Bali. The air here was thick with the scent of frangipani and sea salt, a world away from the dry, oppressive heat of Idaho. It was the kind of place they'd never imagined me in, too expensive, too exotic, 2 times alive, times for the drudge they thought I was. I snapped a photo of myself lounging by a sparkling pool, the water a brilliant, impossible turquoise, a cocktail sweating condensation in my hand, and sent it to the family group chat. No caption, no explanation, no apology. Then, with a satisfaction that felt almost illicit, I turned off my phone. They were still waiting for their free maid to show up, probably picturing me hauling cleaning supplies to Boise, sweating over their toilets. But that photo flipped their world upside down, and I wasn't around to see the fallout. What happened next changed everything. But that's a story for another day, or rather, the climax of a story that began long ago. Have you ever been treated like a doormat by your own family? Like a piece of furniture that is only noticed when it's out of place? Share your story in the comments. Tell me how you stood up for yourself or where you'd escape to if you could. Somewhere like Bali, maybe? Let's hear it. Because for the longest time, I didn't have a voice. Growing up, I never imagined I'd become the family's errand runner. I had dreams, colorful and vibrant, of being an artist, a leader, someone who mattered. When I was 15, everything changed. The world didn't just shift, it shattered. My mom passed away after a long, agonizing illness, leaving a void in our home that never truly healed. It was a silence that echoed in the hallways, a lack of warmth in the kitchen, a gray film that settled over everything. Dad was shattered, a man made of glass, and so was I. We were 2 ghosts haunting the same house, leaning on each other to keep going, surviving on takeout and shared grief. But grief makes people vulnerable, and 2 years later, he met Wendy. Wendy was a woman with a sharp smile, a geometry of teeth that never quite reached her eyes, and even sharper expectations. She moved into our lives with the subtlety of a bulldozer. They married quickly, a whirlwind ceremony that felt more like a business merger than a union of hearts. Soon after, Corey was born, my half-brother, the golden child, the center of Wendy's universe. From the beginning, Wendy made it clear where I stood in this new constellation. I was a satellite, drifting in the cold outer reaches. She'd hand me lists of chores, laundry, dishes, grocery runs written on stationery that smelled of her cloying perfume. Meanwhile, Corey, barely old enough to walk, was endlessly praised just for existing. "He's so bright," she'd coo, brushing past me as I scrubbed the floorboards, stepping over my hands to fuss over him. I was expected to step up, to be the responsible one, a euphemism for the help. Even as a teenager juggling high school, college applications, and the heavy, wet blanket of grief, Dad didn't object. That was the betrayal that stung the most. He'd give me a weary nod, his eyes avoiding mine, torn between keeping the peace in his new marriage and staying silent about his daughter's degradation. He chose the peace. He chose the silence. As Corey grew, the divide only widened, becoming a chasm. Wendy spoiled him with attention that bordered on worship. New clothes, private tennis lessons, elaborate birthday parties filled with laughter and balloons. Parties where I was usually in the kitchen, washing the cake plates. I was scrubbing counters or picking up after him, my efforts barely acknowledged, let alone appreciated. Once, when I was 17, a sensitive age where every look feels like a judgment, I overheard Wendy tell a friend on the phone, "Robin is useful around the house. It's like having hired help, but without the taxes." It stung, a physical pain in my chest, like swallowing a shard of glass. But I swallowed it. I swallowed it all, hoping things would even out. Hoping that if I just worked hard enough, loved them enough, served them enough, I would earn my place back in the family. They never did. By the time I left for college, the pattern was set in stone. Wendy called with constant demands, treating my education as an inconvenience to her schedule. "Fix this handle, that needs painting," while Corey got a free pass to fail classes and break windows. I'd come home for holidays to find my room turned into a storage space, my childhood books boxed up in the damp basement, my posters replaced by his sports trophies, my belongings shoved aside, erased. Dad would shrug, that helpless gesture becoming his signature move, saying, "It's just easier this way." Easier for whom? Certainly not me. I tried talking to him once, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, the wood grain blurring through my tears, my voice trembling. "Why do you let her treat me like this?" I asked, begging him to be my father again. He looked away, staring out the window at the rain, muttering something about keeping the peace, about compromises. That was when I realized I was on my own. Wendy's favoritism wasn't just a phase. It was a wall, a fortress, and I was stuck on the wrong side, scratching at the gates. Corey, whether clueless or complicit, and I began to suspect the latter, followed her lead. He learned early that treating me like an afterthought earned him points with his mother. Whenever I didn't do what they wanted, I was met with sarcasm or cold silence, the kind that freezes the air in a room. The years went by, drifting like dead leaves, but nothing changed. Even as an adult, I was still the one they called for favors, the one expected to drop everything. I'd built a life for myself, a career, a circle of friends, but to them, I remained the girl who showed up with a mop. Each request chipped away at me, a reminder that I never truly belonged. I kept hoping Dad would step in, say something, anything to make it right. He never did. Looking back, I can see how it shaped me. I learned to depend on myself, to find strength in the quiet moments when I wasn't running their errands, to build a fortress of solitude where I was safe. But it also left a weight, a heavy, unseen stone in my gut, a feeling of being invisible in my own family. I carried that burden for years until something inside me began to shift. It wasn't an explosion, not yet, it was a tremor. I wasn't ready to break free yet, but the seed was planted. My life was about to take a different path. While my family leaned on me, dragging me down, I was grinding through my career alone. After college, I landed a job in marketing, a field that sounded glamorous on paper but felt like a battlefield in reality. My first position was at a small boutique agency, crafting ad campaigns for clients who changed their minds every other day, screaming over fonts and color palettes. I'd stay up past midnight, the city lights blinking outside my window like indifferent eyes, tweaking slogans or redesigning graphics, my laptop screen burning my retinas. The pressure was relentless. Deadlines loomed like storm clouds, supervisors nitpicked every pixel, and every mistake felt like a step backward into the abyss. I wanted to climb the ladder, maybe lead a team someday, but every promotion demanded twice the effort, twice the sacrifice. I didn't expect applause from my family. I knew better than that. But a little understanding, a single drop of empathy, would have gone a long way. Instead, my family acted like my work was a pastime, a cute little hobby I did between cleaning sessions. Wendy would call in the middle of a project, her voice sharp and demanding. "The ranch needs cleaning this weekend," she'd say, as if I could drop a national campaign to dust blinds. I'd explain I was swamped, that my career was on the line, but she'd cut me off with a scoff. "It's not that hard," she'd snap, brushing off my workload like it was trivial. "You sit at a computer all day. Real work is managing a household." Corey wasn't any better. He'd text, "Hey, make the place spotless for us," like I was his personal assistant, his underling. I'd stare at those messages, my stomach twisting into knots, wondering why they thought my time was theirs to command. Once, I was pitching to a major client, the kind of account that makes or breaks a year. My nerves were shot from an all-nighter, my coffee intake dangerously high. My phone buzzed mid-meeting. Wendy again, demanding I handle the ranch before their next trip. I silenced it, but the distraction cost me a microsecond of focus. I stumbled on a word. The client passed on my proposal. My boss gave me a look that said I'd blown it. I didn't tell Dad. He'd just say, "Help them out. It's family. Family." The word tasted like spoiled milk. They didn't even ask about my job. They didn't know the name of my company. I pushed harder at work, taking on extra projects to prove myself, to fill the void with professional validation since personal validation was non-existent. Eventually, I landed a better position at a larger agency, managing campaigns for national brands. It was grueling late nights, endless revisions, clients expecting miracles on a shoestring budget. I loved the challenge, the adrenaline of a successful launch, but it was isolating. My coworkers had families who cheered them on, who celebrated their wins with dinners and toasts. Mine saw me as a resource, a tool. One night, after a 16-hour day where I had barely eaten, I got a voicemail from Corey. "Ranch isn't going to clean itself," he said, his tone smug, laughing with someone in the background. I deleted it, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and fatigue. Did they even know what I did for a living? Did they care? I started setting boundaries, tentative little fences, saying no to their constant requests. Wendy didn't take it well. "You're so selfish," she'd hiss over the phone, her words cutting deeper than I'd admit. Corey would chime in, acting like I was letting them down, like I was the villain in their story of entitlement. Dad stayed silent, as always, a ghost in the machine, leaving me to handle it alone. I kept working, kept climbing, but their calls never stopped. Each one reminded me that to them, I was still the one who made their lives easier, the Cinderella who never got the ball. The hardest part wasn't the workload. It was the loneliness, the profound, aching solitude of being surrounded by people who share your blood but not your heart. I'd watch coworkers talk about family dinners or parents proud of their success, showing off photos on their phones. I had none of that. Once, I won an industry award for a campaign, a small but hard-earned victory, a glass trophy I wanted to put on a mantle. I wanted to share it with someone who cared. I called Dad, hoping against hope that he'd be proud. He mumbled, "Congratulations," then immediately shifted the topic to the ranch. "Could you check on it soon?" he asked. "Wendy says the gutters are full." I hung up, my chest tight, the trophy feeling heavy and cold in my hand. By my late 20s, I'd built a solid career, but it came at a cost. I was exhausted, stretched thin between deadlines and obligations. Wendy and Corey never let up their demands, piling on like weights on a drowning swimmer. They didn't see the late nights, the missed weekends, or my fight to be more than their errand runner. I was done being invisible. That realization hit hard, a physical impact, and it set the stage for what came next. The ranch in Boise had belonged to my grandmother, Rose, who passed away 2 years ago. Rose was the only person who had ever looked at me, and really times seen times me. The ranch was her pride, a modest plot she had nurtured with love, filled with memories of summers we spent together planting hydrangeas and baking pies. The air there used to smell of sagebrush and comfort. When her will named me the sole heir, I was stunned. Dad had expected it to go to him, assuming the natural order of things, but she chose me, perhaps recognizing how often I'd been pushed aside at home, or perhaps sensing that I was the only one who would love the land, not just use it. I vowed to honor her by keeping the place intact, never letting it fall into neglect. I allowed my family to use it, hoping it might mend our fractured ties, a peace offering of soil and timber. That was a mistake, a monumental one. Wendy and Corey treated the ranch like their private getaway, dropping by unannounced whenever they pleased. Each visit left behind a trail of chaos that felt personal. Dirty dishes piled in the sink until they grew mold, muddy footprints on the hardwood floors Rose had polished by hand, trash scattered as if they expected a maid service to manifest from thin air. That someone was always me. They never offered a word of thanks. Dad sometimes came along, offering a faint, apologetic smile, but no help. "They're just having fun," he'd say, as if that excused the desecration of my inheritance. One summer, I drove out to check on the place after one of their stays. The kitchen was a disaster zone, plates crusted with dried lasagna, empty beer cans forming pyramids on the counter, a sticky film covering the floor. Corey had brought friends, a rowdy bunch, and they'd left broken furniture and scuff marks on the walls. I spent hours cleaning, my muscles aching, tears of frustration mixing with the sweat on my face, anger simmering in my gut like acid. I called Wendy to ask why they couldn't pick up after themselves. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she snapped, dismissive as flicking away a fly. Corey didn't bother replying when I texted him about it. Another time, they arrived while I was there, knee-deep in tools, trying to fix a leaking pipe under the sink. Wendy walked in, barely acknowledging me, stepping around my legs, and started rearranging furniture. "This place needs a proper touch," she said smugly, moving Rose's favorite armchair, as if my efforts to maintain the structure meant nothing compared to her interior design whims. Corey tossed his jacket onto a chair, leaving his muddy boots by the door, tracking dirt onto the rug I had just vacuumed. I bit back my frustration, but it was boiling inside, a pressure cooker ready to blow. This was my times ranch, my times responsibility, and they treated it like a free resort, and me like the live-in superintendent. I set boundaries. Call first. Clean up after yourselves. They ignored them. Wendy just laughed. A high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "It's practically family property, right?" she said. It wasn't. It was mine, entrusted to me by Rose. Yet, they acted like I was just the caretaker. Dad never intervened. Once, I found him sweeping the porch after one of their visits, looking embarrassed, holding the broom like a foreign object. "I'll talk to them," he muttered, but he never did. He swept a little dust and then put the broom away, leaving the mountain of mess for me. The breaking point came a year ago. I'd spent a weekend repairing a fence, my hands raw and blistered from the wire and wood. When I returned a week later, the ranch was trashed again. Soda cans everywhere, carpet stained with something red wine, juice. A window cracked. Wendy had thrown a party for Corey's friends, and no one told me. I called her, keeping my tone firm, shaking with suppressed rage. "This has to stop," I said. She scoffed. "It's just a house. Relax." Corey texted later. "Ease up. It's no big deal." No big deal. It was Rose's legacy, and they were destroying it. After that, I began restricting their access, locking the gates whenever I wasn't around. Wendy didn't take it well. Her voicemails dripped with irritation. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she'd say, as if I owed them free access to my property. Corey sent snide messages accusing me of acting superior, of being a landlord. Dad stayed silent, leaving me to face their resentment alone. I hated the tension, the knot in my stomach every time my phone rang, but I was done letting them walk all over me. The ranch was my connection to Rose, a reminder of someone who truly valued me. I wasn't going to let it become their dumping ground. That resolve kept growing, and soon it would change everything. 3 days before their weekend getaway, Wendy called me to their house. Her voice was cold, all business, insisting I come over that evening. I knew it was about the ranch. My stomach churned as I drove there, the familiar route feeling like a march to the gallows, the weight of years spent meeting their demands pressed on my shoulders. I'd been through this too many times, but something about it felt different, sharper, more final. When I stepped into their living room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Wendy sat on the couch, flipping through a magazine with deliberate nonchalance, the rustle of the pages the only sound. Corey sprawled nearby, glued to his phone, the blue light illuminating his bored expression, barely looking up. Joshua, his fiancé, sat rigidly in an armchair, giving me a brief, awkward nod. Dad lingered by the kitchen doorway, staring into a coffee mug, avoiding my gaze. The room felt staged, a tribunal assembled to pass judgment. Wendy got straight to the point, snapping the magazine shut. "We're going to the ranch this weekend," she said, her tone clipped, brooking no argument. "You need to prepare it. Clean the floors, stock the fridge, the usual." I started to object, to say I had work, but she cut me off with a raised hand. "And no, you're not joining us," she added, her eyes narrowing, a cruel glint in them. "This is for family, not the hired help." The words hit like a physical slap. The room seemed to tilt. Hired help? I stood there stunned, the air leaving my lungs. The insult wasn't just mean. It was a defining declaration of how they saw me. Corey smirked, not even trying to hide his amusement. "Just make sure it's perfect," he said, his tone smug. Joshua nodded, adding, "Shouldn't be too hard, right?" Trying to fit in with the pack. Each comment landed like a fresh wound. I turned to Dad, hoping, praying he'd say something. Asterisk. Defend me. Claim me. Asterisk. But he shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor tiles. "It's just the way things are," he muttered, his voice barely audible. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. I wasn't just their errand runner. I was invisible. A tool they used and discarded. I'd spent years maintaining the ranch for their whims, and now they were shutting me out of my own property, telling me I wasn't family enough to enjoy it, only family enough to scrub the toilets. I kept my voice steady, though my hands were shaking at my sides. "It's my ranch," I said, meeting her gaze. Wendy gave a sharp laugh. "Don't get any ideas," she replied. "You're good at cleaning, so stick to it." Corey leaned forward. "Don't make a fuss," he said. Joshua shrugged, murmuring, "She's right." The walls felt like they were closing in. Their words echoed years of being pushed aside, of birthdays forgotten, of achievements ignored. This wasn't just about a weekend. It was a message that I didn't belong. I tried reasoning one last time. "I've always let you use the place," I said, my voice rising, cracking slightly. "Why can't I come?" She smiled coldly. "This is for us," she said, gesturing toward Corey, Joshua, and Dad. "You're not needed for the good parts," Corey snorted. "Exactly." Joshua gave a faint chuckle like it was all a game. Dad stayed silent, his hands buried in his pockets, a statue of cowardice. I waited for him to speak, to say I was his daughter, not some servant, but he didn't. The pain was sharp, agonizing, but familiar. I'd felt it growing up every time she favored him and every time Dad allowed it. But this was worse. They weren't just taking me for granted, they were erasing me. I stood there, fists clenched, memories of fixing their messes at the ranch flooding back. I'd repaired fences in the freezing rain, scrubbed floors until my knees bled, and kept Rose's legacy alive, only for them to treat it like their private resort, and me like the staff. I turned to leave, my throat tight, eyes burning. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll take care of the ranch." It was a lie. But they didn't know that yet. Wendy nodded, satisfied, and went back to her magazine. Corey returned to his phone. Joshua didn't look up. Dad gave me a fleeting glance, sadness in his eyes, but I was done hoping he'd step in. As I walked out, their voices faded, planning their trip like I wasn't even there. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The hurt was real, a gaping hole in my chest, but so was my resolve. They'd gone too far, and I wasn't going to let it pass. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my laptop screen in the dark. Wendy's words, "This is a family trip, not for the help," kept looping in my head like a broken record. Each repetition was a fresh cut. Corey's smirk, Joshua's shrug, Dad's silence. They'd made it clear I meant nothing to them. I wasn't going to clean their ranch or play their games anymore. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then I made a choice. I wasn't going to Boise. I was going somewhere else entirely. I opened a travel site and searched for the farthest destination I could afford on short notice. Bali popped up, a tropical paradise, lush, green, vibrant, the complete opposite of their dusty ranch retreat. I found a last-minute deal for a luxury resort, the kind of place they'd never imagined me visiting. My savings took a hit, but I didn't care. Money could be earned back. Dignity had to be seized. I booked the flight, leaving in 36 hours, and reserved a room with a view. The decision felt like a weight lifting, a spark of defiance catching fire in dry grass. They wanted me to scrub floors? I'd be sipping cocktails instead. The next day, I packed light, a swimsuit, a few breezy dresses, my passport. My phone buzzed with messages from Wendy, reminding me to get the ranch ready. "Don't forget the patio furniture," she texted. Corey sent a follow-up. "Don't slack on this." I ignored them, my resolve hardening into diamond. By the following morning, I was on a plane, watching clouds drift past, adrenaline and relief coursing through me like a drug. 16 hours later, I landed in Bali. The air was warm and heavy with promise, humid and fragrant. I checked into the resort, a sprawling oasis with a pool shimmering under the sun like liquid sapphire. I didn't think about the ranch. I didn't think about them. That afternoon, I slipped into a sundress and ordered a drink at the poolside bar. The bartender smiled, sliding a bright cocktail garnished with an orchid across the counter. I took a sip, savoring the sweetness, the bite of rum, and snapped a photo of myself relaxed, the pool sparkling behind me. I opened the family group chat, my thumb hovering over the send button. Wendy, Corey, Joshua, and Dad were probably packing for their precious weekend, imagining the clean floors and stocked fridge. I sent the photo. No caption. No explanation. Then I turned my phone off. Meanwhile, back in Boise, the scene was unfolding exactly as I had orchestrated. They arrived at the ranch expecting a spotless retreat. Instead, they walked into the chaos they'd left behind weeks ago. Dirty dishes with hardened crusts, scattered trash, unmade beds smelling of stale air, dust bunnies the size of tumbleweeds. I hadn't lifted a finger. Wendy's face must have twisted when she saw it. Her perfect weekend plan falling apart in an instant. Corey probably cursed, blaming me, kicking a piece of trash, while Joshua stood by, useless as ever. Dad might have muttered something about fixing it, but there wasn't time. The place was unlivable, and they had nowhere to stay. They scrambled to find a hotel, but Boise's options were limited that weekend. Some local festival had filled the decent ones. They ended up at an overpriced downtown chain that charged extra for everything: parking, breakfast, breathing. I heard later they paid hundreds per night, far more than they'd planned. Wendy's credit card took the hit, and Corey grumbled about the cost, but they had no choice. Their family trip turned into a cramped hotel stay. No ranch, no escape, just a bill they couldn't avoid, and the distinct flavor of their own medicine. I didn't know the full fallout yet, but I could imagine their frustration. Wendy's sharp tone echoing off beige hotel walls, Corey's whining, Joshua nodding along like a bobblehead. They'd counted on me to make their weekend perfect, to play the role they'd assigned me. That photo from Bali wasn't just a picture, it was a message written in neon lights. I was done being their errand runner, done letting them walk over me. I'd taken back my power, and it felt incredible. In Bali, I spent the day by the pool, the sun warming my skin, baking the tension out of my muscles. I didn't check my phone or care about their complaints. For the first time in years, I was free not just from their demands, but from the crushing weight of trying to belong to people who didn't want me. I wasn't sure what they'd do next, but I knew one thing: they'd never see me the same way again. That moment marked a turning point, and I was ready to embrace it. Bali was a paradise I didn't know I needed. The resort buzzed with life, its air thick with the scent of incense and ocean. I hadn't come entirely alone, though. In a spur-of-the-moment decision before leaving, I'd invited Monica, my closest friend since college, along with Stephen, Lynn, and Greg, a tight-knit crew who'd always had my back. They jumped at the chance to join me, scrambling to get time off, and their presence turned the trip into something more than an escape. It felt like a reclamation. We spent our days weaving through bustling markets, haggling for trinkets, and laughing over shared plates of spicy noodles. Monica led the charge, her quick wit cutting through the group's banter. "You're glowing," she told me one morning, her eyes sharp as we sipped coffee by the beach. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Stephen, always the jokester, roped us into a cooking class where we fumbled through making satay, leaving the kitchen in chaos but filled with laughter, a good kind of chaos. Lynn, ever practical, kept us on schedule, while Greg's quiet humor grounded our wilder moments. For once, I wasn't worrying about anyone's demands but my own. One evening, Monica and I slipped away to a quiet corner of the resort. The others were at a bar, but I needed this moment with her. We sat by the pool, our feet dangling in the water, the stars bright above, reflected in the stillness below. I took a deep breath and let it out, a long exhale that seemed to carry years of frustration with it. "I'm done living for them," I said, my voice steady. She tilted her head, waiting. I told her everything, not the old wounds or the ranch's messes, but my plan to break free. I wanted to set boundaries, maybe sell the ranch, and focus on a life that was mine. No more bending to their whims. No more playing the dutiful daughter to people who didn't see me. "You've been carrying them too long," she said, her tone firm but kind. "What's next?" I leaned back, staring at the sky. "I don't know exactly. Maybe starting my own marketing firm, traveling more, building something for myself." She listened, nodding, her hand resting on mine. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," she said. I felt a spark of clarity, like I was finally stepping into my own story. The rest of the trip was a blur of freedom. We danced at a beach party, the bass thumping in our chests, the music pulsing through us. Stephen dragged me into the waves, laughing as we stumbled in the surf. Lynn planned a temple visit, her quiet awe contagious as we walked through ancient stone gates. Greg snapped photos, capturing moments I'd want to remember forever. Not posed, not perfect, but real. I wasn't just escaping. I was rebuilding, surrounded by people who valued me. Monica's words stayed with me. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone anymore. That realization was a gift, one I'd carry forward. When I landed back in the States, the bubble of Bali popped, but the strength I found there remained. An email from Wendy was waiting. I sat in my apartment, the glow of the trip still lingering in my mind, and opened it. Her words were sharp, dripping with indignation. "Your stunt was unacceptable," she wrote, accusing me of sabotaging their weekend. She demanded an apology for leaving the ranch a mess, claiming I'd embarrassed them in front of Joshua. Corey had chimed in, his message attached, calling me selfish and immature. Their audacity burned, but it wasn't surprising. They'd always twisted things to make me the problem. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Their words no longer cut the way they once did. They were dull knives trying to carve stone. Bali had changed something in me, given me clarity that I didn't owe them anything. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked her email and his number, severing the cord that had kept me tied to their demands. My phone felt lighter, as if I'd finally shed a weight I'd carried too long. I wasn't going to argue or explain. I was done. The next morning, I called Cynthia, a real estate agent I'd met through work. She was sharp, pragmatic, and had a knack for finding solutions. I explained my plan to rent out the ranch. It was Rose's legacy, but it had become a chain linking me to their chaos. I wanted to generate income, I told her, not stress. She understood instantly. suggesting a long-term lease to a family or a small business. We arranged a meeting to walk through the property and prepare a listing. When I hung up, a sense of control settled over me. The ranch would no longer be their playground, it would be mine, on my terms. Later, I learned more details about what had unfolded in Boise. They'd shown up expecting a pristine retreat, only to find the mess they'd left behind: moldy food, stained carpets, the works. With no time to clean and no equipment, they'd scrambled for a hotel. Wendy had covered the bill, her credit card strained under the cost, while Corey complained endlessly, blaming her for the fiasco. Their embarrassment deepened as Joshua, caught in the middle, stayed silent, his discomfort plain. Their perfect weekend had collapsed into bickering, and a hefty tab, a fitting reflection of their own carelessness. I didn't gloat. Their misfortune wasn't the point. What mattered was the lesson I'd finally learned. For years, I'd let their needs eclipse mine, cleaning up their messes, absorbing their insults, and hoping for scraps of respect. No more. Bali had shown me that I could build a life defined by my own choices, not their expectations. Talking with Monica had sealed that truth. My worth wasn't theirs to measure. Cutting them off wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my voice. Renting the ranch wasn't just a financial move. It was a boundary they could no longer cross. I began sketching out what might come next. Maybe launching a small marketing firm. Maybe traveling again. The specifics didn't matter yet. What mattered was that, for once, I was choosing myself. I looked around my apartment, the space somehow brighter, more open. I wasn't the woman who'd left for Bali, burdened by their disregard. I'd learned to value myself above their manipulation, and that was a victory they could never take. The text messages could pile up in the void. The voicemails could rot in the server. I was free. And the view from here? It was spectacular.